So, good morning everyone. My name's Weddle. I work for an organisation called NEPCon. I've got half an hour now to speak to you about a free online tool to help companies conduct due diligence with the EU timber regulation. So who are we? Just briefly, we're an international non-profit organisation. We've been working on sustainable land use and responsible trade of forest commodities for over 20 years now. We're a mission-driven organisation, so we have a vision where a world where human choices ensure a sustainable future. And our mission is to build commitment and capacity for mainstreaming sustainability. So we're trying to do good things for the world. We work in 4 different program areas: conservation, land use, traceability, and responsible sourcing. Within these areas, we conduct project work, so donor-funded project work, and also offer assurance services to companies. We've got a team of over 120 people, situated across the globe, 19 countries with 16 legal entities, mainly across Europe, Russia and Southeast Asia. And then we've got a network of many more consultants. So we pretty much cover the globe with our network. Our focus here at the Timber Expo, where we have a stand, is on the EU timber regulation. Now, some of you might have heard of this already, and others of you might not have done. The EU timber regulation is a law that was adopted by the EU and came into force on the 3rd of March 2013, and it's applicable across all EU member states. The law makes it illegal for companies placing timber on the EU market that has been illegally harvested in the country of origin. So that's timber harvested within the EU, and also timber that's imported into the EU. So that's been harvested outside and then is imported in. So it's illegal for companies to put that timber on the market. But also, what's an important element of the timber regulation is that those companies doing so have to conduct what's called due diligence. So they have to take care when sourcing their timber to make sure that it's not been illegally harvested in that country of origin. So this due diligence is what we're trying to help companies do. There are 4 main steps we see in the due diligence process. The first is really like a quality management step, so looking at scope, commitment, and systems, so procedures, assigning responsibilities to staff. Second step is all about information gathering, so accessing information about the products and the supply chain. So what species of timber, what is the origin of that timber, how complex is the supply chain, information about who the timber's been bought from, so that first tier supplier, the product type, lots of information gathering. Once that information has been gathered, then the second step in due diligence really is looking at what is the risk of that timber have been illegally harvested in the country of origin. So with the information in front, a company has to think, what is the chance of this piece of timber that I'm importing into the EU having been illegally harvested in the country of origin? Which can be incredibly tricky to do, because how can a company in Europe particularly know what are the laws in the country of origin and what is the risk of violation with those laws? So it's quite a tricky step. The EU timber regulation then says if the risk is not negligible, then before a company places that timber or those timber products in the EU market, they have to conduct mitigation actions in order to lower that risk before placing on the market, and that's what we call risk mitigation. again, this risk mitigation really needs to address the specific risks that have been identified. Again, we feel this is quite tricky. We've been working with companies now for 4.5 years to help them comply with the EU timber regulation. We're an approved monitoring organisation, and we realise that this is incredibly challenging for companies to do. Even the big ones who have lots of resources, have lots of experience of working with FSC certification and such forth for a number of years, even for them it's tricky, let alone for the smaller, more medium-sized companies. So what we try and do at NEPCon is to produce a load of risk assessments and tools to help companies do that. And that's what I'm here to show you today. We've produced a new online platform called the NEPCon Sourcing Hub that is intended to help companies conduct this due diligence for the EU timber regulation. You can see here we do include some other commodities, but our focus really here today is on the timber. I will go into the hub in a short while to give you a good overview, but I just have a few slides to show you first. Really our aim has been that the Sourcing Hub becomes a one-stop shop. So everything you need to conduct due diligence in one place. So the idea is that you go into the hub, you select the commodity that you're interested in, such as timber. You select the country that you're interested to learn more about. Then we have an overview of the risks of sourcing timber from that country. And then we have a whole host of other more generic tools and guidance documents to help companies. And I'll go into the hub and show you this in just a moment. But before I move on, I just want to make a point that this is completely free. The NEPCon Sourcing Hub has been developed with donor funding. So we've worked closely with FSC within their controlled wood programme. We've got funding from the European Union and funding from UK aid. So everything that I'm showing you now is freely available to access. It's open access on the site. So when it comes to timber legality tools, we've done timber legality risk assessments for 62 timber producing countries. We've got some other timber specific tools for a number of those countries, and then we've got a number of more generic due diligence tools. So these will help a company establish their due diligence system from scratch, such as template letters that can be modified and sent to suppliers requesting information about products and supply chains. Due diligence guidelines outlining the due diligence process in some detail. There's some Excel templates which have all the appropriate columns identifying the type of information that's useful to have or required to have for compliance with the regulation, and various other checklists and Word templates for policies and things. So a real host of useful tools that you can download for free and adapt for your company. But really we see these timber legality risk assessments as being the heart of the hub. So like I said, we've conducted 62 national level timber legality risk assessments. And a significant majority of this work was funded by the FSC in collaboration for their controlled wood system. We've done a lot of work on these 62 risk assessments. Here's an overview of the process. So the first step was we outlined the framework for the timber legality risk assessments. So here is where we took all the areas of law that the EU timber regulation specifies should be included in the applicable legislation. So these are the different areas of law that a company needs to be aware of whether there's any risk of violation or not. So that's things like trade and transport, third parties' rights, harvesting regulations and such forth. So that uses the framework, the starting point for our risk assessments. Then we've had a in-house timber legality expert from NEPCon develop these risk assessments in collaboration with local experts in country. So where we don't have experts in those countries ourselves, we go and connect and work closely with a local expert. There's a whole process of stakeholder consultation. So we send these draft versions of the risk assessments out to all relevant stakeholders to ask for their feedback. Maybe we've got the laws wrong, or maybe our evaluation of risk is they disagree with, they have some extra information they want to share with us. Then there's a whole quality review procedure there as well. Once the risk assessment has been finalised, we look at the number of areas of law where we've concluded whether there's a low risk or there's not a low risk, and we give the country a score, which then equates to a colour coding on the map. When we're doing these risk assessments, like I say, they're really quite comprehensive. There's a lot of background research that goes into these. So we've looked at multiple sources of information. Like I said, we conduct stakeholder consultation. We look at national statistical reports, we look at government reports, certification audit, public summaries, a whole host of different NGO reports there, all looking for what's the evidence of illegal harvesting in particular countries of particular species. And we pull that all together in one place and evaluate what is the risk of sourcing illegal timber from a particular country. And then we come to a risk conclusion. For all those different categories of law, 21 subcategories in total, 5 main categories, 21 subcategories. In each of those, we make a conclusion about whether we think the risk is low or whether it's not low, which is what we call specified risk. And we present that in our risk assessment. This is what the risk assessment looks like. As you can see, some of them are quite long. They're so comprehensive, some of them are reached like 80 pages or so, but I wanted to just give you an idea of the detail that's included here, because companies who are using a risk assessment to help them comply with the EU timber regulation, they're still obliged, it's still their responsibility to comply with the regulations. So they'll want to know exactly how credible and how reliable these risk assessments are. So we include all of the information in there. So there's links, everything is fully referenced. So we reference the laws themselves, we reference any of the reports and evidence that we've used to evaluate the risk, and we include it here. Within the risk assessment itself, we also, for some countries, we specify the source type. So we know that in some countries, the risk of a violation against a particular law can be quite different depending on whether the forest is a natural forest or whether it's a plantation forest, or different types of ownership, whether it's a smallholder. And so when the risks are different in that country, we separate out the different risks within the risk assessment itself. So you can see here the example for natural forest, plantation forest and bamboo forest. This is actually the risk assessment for China. So we're trying to give really very detailed information in the full risk assessment itself. I will show you the hub in just a moment, because we don't expect many people to really read the whole risk assessment. It's quite lengthy, quite technical, quite complicated, and so we have a solution for that. We've summarized it and put it on the sourcing hub. But before I kind of exit the presentation and show you the sourcing hub, I just wanted to mention that for 5 countries, we've also produced a couple of country-specific tools. So we've got the risk mitigation guide. For these guides, we pull out just the risks. So we've pulled out those laws which we've identified there's a risk of a violation, and we specify in more detail potential risk mitigation actions. So this example we have for you here is that for China, there's a risk of mis- or underreporting on customs declarations. And then here we say to review and verify certain documents. And it specifies exactly what those are. When you look at the accompanying guide we have is a China document guide. So I took exactly that same risk that I just showed you in the risk mitigation guide, and I've pulled out one of those those documents that we refer to, that we recommend that you verify. And we give you an example. We've translated some sections, and highlighted these are the sections that you should look at and check for the information. So for 5 countries, and I think I can show you here, for China, Honduras, Liberia, Ghana, and DRC, we have those country-specific guides that give very detailed, very practical information on how to conduct risk mitigation when sourcing timber from those countries. Now I've got a few minutes left, so I'm just going to exit this and go into the sourcing hub just to show you how that works. Although you can come and visit us afterwards at our stand if you want to talk about it in more detail. Okay, so this is what the sourcing hub looks like. We're going to go straight into timber. The other commodities have similar information. And this is where I hope Wi-Fi is my friend. Yes. Okay. So the initial map view. This is where you can see the overall results of the 62 risk assessments that we've conducted. So where there's green, this is where we've not identified any risk of illegal logging in those countries. Through the colour coding to more high-risk countries where they're colour-coded in red. Now, I really want to stress that the red and the orange here, we're not saying that the red represents majority of timber coming out of Russia, for example, is illegal. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying here is there's more categories, more different areas of law where a risk has been identified. So you can still buy legal timber from Russia, but we recommend that you do more risk mitigation actions than for the other countries. Okay, we don't want to put anyone off buying timber from red countries. Okay. I'm going to go into a country to show you what's on the country page. And this is where we've summarized all that detailed and complicated information in the risk assessments to give you a good overview. So the top here is where we give an overview of the forestry and timber sector in that country. Over here, top right, is where you can download the risk assessment in a PDF format. Then we have a list of applicable legislations. And then here we have that risk mitigation guide and the document guide that I showed you in the presentation. You can download those there. And then moving down, we have these 3 different tabs. Number 1, information gathering. So we're following the flow of due diligence here. We've got number 1, information gathering. This gives you an overview of the different timber sources from China. So you can see, again, we have the plantations, natural forests, and bamboo forests. And we give you a little information about each one of those timber sources. We then go further and we list some key documents at the forest level, trade and transport, and then export and customs. And then for some countries, obviously not for China because it's not here, but for some countries we also highlight some specific species. But I think what most people are interested to see is this tab. Step number 2, the risk assessment, So this is where we've summarized the risk assessment. So we just give bullet points for each of those categories. And when the category is low risk, we've not identified any risk of violation, the icon is green. So icon over here is green. So here you can see for China we've identified risks in all those 5 different categories, and we say what they are. So for example, taxes and fees, there's a risk that VAT is not paid appropriately. Down here we've identified some specific, particular risky species that we think people need to be aware of. Over in tab 3, this is where we propose what companies can do to mitigate those risks that we've identified. And here we give quite specific information about collecting certain documents and how to verify certain documents. Potentially they might want to do some stakeholder consultation, maybe some on-site visits. So it's like an on-site audit of the supplier. And then we identify the level as well. So in some cases there is a risk of mixing within the supply chain. Other risks are more relevant to the actual harvesting activity at the forest level. We also have some generic pages. What is the EU timber regulation? What is due diligence? A little bit of background information in legal logging, should you want to know more. Also on the hub, you can learn more about our methodology. So find out in more detail about that scoring methodology, about our methodology for conducting the risk assessments. There's lots of information there. What I'm also particularly keen to show you is this feedback page. Now, we see that these risk assessments are living documents. What we've put up here is like a snapshot in time. And we're aware that things change, laws change, risks of violation change. People disagree about the situation in the country. People have different experiences. And we're really, really welcoming feedback. We're actively trying to encourage people to give us feedback. So if you look at one of these risk assessments and your experience from that country tells you something different, please contact us. We are updating these risk assessments depending on the feedback we get and how quickly things change in country. And we will always note on the webpage at what point the risk assessment was last updated. I think I might pause there just to ensure that we have maybe a few minutes left for questions. Or I might look to my colleagues to say, have I forgotten anything really obvious that you think I should have mentioned at this point? No, good. Okay. If you don't want to ask your question in this public space, then please feel free.
I wasn't there with this time, but I want to ask a question with regard to timber sources. You presented a map where most African countries producing timber and exporting timber into EU. Most of them were red coded, meaning that the risk level is very, very high. What went into Europe? What are the factors that went into your calculation to assess that those are high risk?
Yeah, okay. So, I've got a wire attached. The question was the color coding on the map. So maybe we'll go back to the map view. Asking about what factors we looked at to come up with the different colors on the map, right? Okay. So the EU timber regulation gives the 5 broad areas of law that an EU importer should assess the risk of illegality when it comes to conducting their due diligence. Within those 5 broad areas, we've identified 21 subcategories. Within those subcategories, we've done all that research, we've evaluated the risk, and we conclude either it's low or it's specified risk. Then what we do is there's a caveat actually. Within those 21 subcategories, they're not all applicable in all countries. So some countries, they don't have particular legislation on, say, third parties' rights, for example. In Brazil, they don't have that. So we look at, out of those 21 subcategories, which ones are applicable, and then we look at which ones of those that are applicable, which ones have a low risk, and then they give in a point. We try and make it even more detailed where we can, so when their risk is different for plantation or natural forest or the different timber sources. So we try to factor in, many countries, there's a lower risk when it comes to plantation timber than natural forest. So we've tried to factor that in. So if there's a high risk for natural forest, low risk for plantation, we'll give half a point. And then we total up all those points and we come up with a percentage. And then that equates to a colour on the map.
Maybe on issues of legality. In some countries, for example, they have certain laws.
Yeah.
And within that country, they are laws that you have to abide with to get, let's say, timber out. But maybe if you look at it from EU perspective, it may look as though those laws, if applicable in EU, would be illegal timber. But in those countries, they would be legal timber. So whose law are you using? Is it the EU law or the national laws?
Another good question to clarify. So the question was, are we looking at EU laws or national laws? And actually, well, it's looking at national laws. So again, the EU regulation itself says you have to look at the national laws. So what is the risk of violation of national laws in that country of harvest? Which is what makes this so challenging for companies importing into the EU. Because how are you meant to know what those laws are in those other countries? Like, it's really difficult. Which is why we've spent 4 years working on 62 of these risk assessments. There's been a lot of work's gone into this.
And which is why I believe that some of these countries where I come from Ghana.
Yep.
My country is color coded. I mean, it's red coded.
Yep.
For me, there is some element of bias.
Right.
Because certain issues that we identify to be legal,
Yep.
you may see that to be illegal. But over here, we are red.
Okay.
So the EU, buyer is going to be skeptical.
Yep.
They may think that any timber coming from Ghana into EU
Sure.
may be coming from illegal source. Maybe that illegal, I'm not saying that there's no illegality in my issue, for example. There is. But they are limited to the domestic market and not for the export market. But with that, we are, one brush for everybody.
Yep.
I think that is not fair.
Good point. Good point. Yeah, I'm. Thank you. So I'm just going to repeat for the benefit of others. The gentleman made a very good point. That actually in some of these countries where we have that, maybe red, orange, and there is some illegal logging, and in some of those countries that illegal timber is actually just sold on the domestic market and is not exported, and so it does perhaps present a slightly biased view when looking at importing using this information. So that is it's a very good point. So thank you for bringing that up. Good comment. But I would also like to repeat that you thanked us for doing this work. Yeah. So thank you for that. I think our time is now up, but we do have a stand, T730. So if you would like to discuss this further, please come and chat to us. We're here for the rest of the fair, and this is exactly what we're here to discuss. We're here to discuss illegal logging, the ETR, the sourcing hub. And before I go, I just want to remind everyone that this is free. This is free, so please take a look, use it, and give us feedback as well. We want to improve the site. This is just version number 1, and the more feedback that we get, the better we can make it. So please get in touch.